Good morning, everyone. My name is Stacey Scott, and on behalf of my co-authors, Kori Inkpen and Sheelagh Carpendale, I want to express our extreme honor to be awarded the Lasting Impact Award from CSCW 2020. This is an extreme honor for us, and it's extremely personally gratifying for me. This paper was a core part of my PhD, and Kori and Sheelagh were my co-supervisors. So this paper explored groups collaborating at traditional tabletop workspaces. So we looked at different groups doing different kinds of tasks on different sizes and shapes of tables, and really tried to understand how those groups were using the space on the table to help us think about what the design of interfaces for digital tabletop workspaces should look like. What we found in the paper was that people were very territorial in their use of a shared workspace. And that territoriality actually provided them a lot of benefits to coordinating their work, to sharing the space, overall to interacting within a shared workspace and the constraints that that provides or that puts on the group. And the knowledge we gained from the study around territoriality and territorial behavior and social norms in general and the benefits they can provide when people are working together in a shared space has informed a lot of the CSCW systems that I've built in my career. And I'm still using that knowledge today. It's been extremely foundational for how to think about designing systems that really support and not hinder people's social interactions. The main message that I hope that you'll take away today is that understanding social norms like territoriality can help CSCW designers build flexible, adaptable systems that support a multitude of individual and group behaviors as needed. So today I'm going to talk about what is territoriality and why it matters, and also how can we leverage territoriality and other social norms when we design CSCW systems. We'll start with the first one. So probably most people in the audience think about territoriality at a larger scale than a shared tabletop. The concept is really broad. It applies to geographical and geopolitical segregation of spaces where countries have borders. Within countries, there's regional, state, or provincial borders. On a block, there's houses. Those houses might have fences around them to very clearly demarcate what's your space and what's someone else's space. Gangs can often create territories within neighborhoods or blocks in a city. Even on a bus, somebody may claim their territory and say, I don't want anyone sitting beside me, simply by putting a bag next to them on the seat. That's a territorial marker. That's a signal to others that that place is owned, at least temporarily, by somebody. In a shared workspace like the table we see in the library here, there's two people working on a large table. Each have established their own territory on that table. They're working independently, but they have their stuff laid around them. If one of them got up and walked away, went to the bathroom, somebody else coming to that table would clearly understand that that space that has been vacated is still someone's territory. Their stuff, their territorial markers are there, claiming at least temporary ownership of that space. So within our paper, when we watched people using different types of materials on different types of tables and doing different activities, what we found very consistently was when people arrived at the table to share it, it was sort of initially a group territory, and all the resources are available for sharing. As you start working and as you sit down at the table or stand at the table, your personal space, the kind of bubble that exists around you that people stay out of, and that's another social norm people use, that extends onto the table. And so what we saw was people developing personal territories. Those territories were mutually understood to be reserved for the person's use that was directly seated near it. And all of our participants respected each other's territory. If somebody went to take a resource or wanted a resource in someone else's personal territory, they would typically either implicitly or explicitly ask permission from that person to take that resource. And we also saw the use of storage territories, or the development of storage territories. This was more of a practical identification of territories. The ownership of those storage territories really depended on where that storage territory lived. If it lived in a personal territory, those resources or items in the storage territory, such as resources that might be used later or work that was finished and set aside, they would still belong to the person who owned the personal territory. If the storage territory was established in the group territory, then those resources would be available for anyone to use. The concept of territoriality that we saw in our study and that we studied more broadly really came down to a sense of ownership or a sense of responsibility for it. And all the definitions in social science around territoriality talk a lot about ownership. And those territories provide a space of your own, especially the personal territories, to work and to think and sometimes to protect your stuff. Sometimes there's a very physical boundary for protecting your stuff or doing those things, like a door, an office door, or a bedroom door. But also, even when there isn't a physical boundary, the concept of a territory, this mutually understood space, there's a psychological boundary. People understand that an area that has been reserved, whether it's because someone has laid out their stuff on a library table and that area now is reserved for them, or whether you're just working with somebody in a shared space and you can see that they're near that space and they're working in that space, it's understood that that space is there for working. It helps those personal territories also help people to disengage from the group activity if someone needs to think or work, not quite privately, but just sort of disengaged from the group. So territories provide a space for that. We also saw that territories were very flexible. So the size and shape of territories can shrink and grow depending on the task being done and the size of the materials, depending on the size and the shape of the table and the space that is being shared. But we also saw that throughout the task, whatever activity groups were doing, that territories could change as well. So if two people were working together on a joint task and they were working independently, maybe they were each doing part of the task, they had done the divide and conquer strategy, they would work in their personal territories. But then at some point when they wanted to amalgamate or discuss some of their individual findings, a lot of times their personal territories would start to collapse and they would form a larger group territory to work together. And we see that in the top picture where one person's personal territory has been collapsed so they can work together. And we saw that this was a very flexible concept. So territories could be as big as they needed to be or could be within the space, or as small as they needed to be or could be in the space. And people were very adaptable to that. So what can we do with that knowledge of territoriality when we want to design CSCW systems? One of the things that we take away from understanding territories is that, and territorial behavior in a shared workspace, is that people are very flexible, or their behaviors are very flexible, and they want flexible spaces to support the different types of activities that they'll do and different kind of individual and collaborative workflows that they might take up in a task. So we investigated a number of different techniques that allow people to make, within a tabletop workspace, different kinds of environments that allow ultimate flexibility in arranging of materials, being able to store things in efficient ways so that they could create storage territories, but also so they can manipulate the digital objects in a very flexible way. They can make, there was no constraints on where they could put their personal territories or what the group territory was allowing them to do. So in the project on the left, you see a very flexible, very minimalistic workspace where essentially all digital items act like digital pieces of paper. They can be moved very flexibly around and easily around the tabletop, and they can be stored in storage bins, which were digital containers that allowed people to store things in a very space-efficient manner and be able to make a pile of something. Everything automatically shrunk within that so they could see things easily, and then they could move those storage items around. On the right, we see a project a number of years later that we did for the Canadian military, and it's a little more complex. It has more structure in terms of the type of content in there. There's a lot of there's a whole simulation of maritime operations going on, but you still see that very minimalistic interface where people can move the different information items around, very similar to pieces of paper. And the other thing we were doing in that project was we were exploring how people access more advanced functionality. So looking at bringing up menus close to where someone was at the side of the table or in context wherever they were working. And that allowed them to move around the table, move their personal territories around the table as they wanted to, or shift them if they were working together with someone at the table. The other thing we took away from the Territoriality project was the desire for people to have personal and private spaces or territories in a shared workspace. So some of the early projects that you saw on the other slide, they provided a single display, and tabletop in particular, where they could make those personal spaces or territories as they wanted on the table. In later projects, we were exploring the use of moving that personal territory or even private territory off the table onto a connected personal device, in particular tablets in the projects that we explored. In some projects, like the one on the upper left, there was a requirement for a private space. It was a card game where you had a private hand of cards, and so you needed a space that was off the table that other people couldn't see. In the project on the right, this is a collaborative sense-making or data analysis task where people are working with geospatial data, and they have a shared map on the table, and then they can browse the available data on their individual workspaces. And the tablets were very interesting in that context. It provided, in some ways, a private territory or space for them to work in, but it was also very flexible in that they could easily share by showing each other the tablet or lining the tablets up along the table edge, which they often did in the project. And so they could create and even use those personal devices or private devices as even a group territory if they lined them up together and they worked on them collaboratively. So that was, again, providing that flexible kind of workspace. So the final takeaway from this paper was the knowledge that social norms are highly flexible and support different behaviors in different situations. Social norms provide basic rules for behavior in certain situations, in certain contexts, with certain people, but those rules can be broken or bent to allow people to adapt to different situations really well. And typical computer systems are not that flexible. One of the things that we've been trying to build into our systems is more flexibility, and more flexibility in particular in how individual users use the system and how groups of users use the system. So this video is showing participants in a study helping each other select data that they're viewing on their tablet. So what you see is one person moving both of the regions of interest, which is the selection technique for showing the data on the tablet. And so one person is actually moving their own and their partner's region of interest. They don't have to do that, but the system allows them to do that, gives them the flexibility to move their own, which would be the natural mapping, and also allows them to move their partners. So it doesn't constrain them from not being able to move someone else's, which a lot of designers would put that constraint in there thinking that might interfere too much with another person's behavior. But the reality is we're really good at socially mitigating that kind of interaction, so we allow them to do that. So in conclusion, I hope that I was able to show that understanding social norms like territoriality can help CSCW designers build flexible, adaptable systems that support a multitude of individual and group behaviors as they need. Once again, I want to express our extreme gratitude and honor for being awarded the Lasting Impact Award from CSCW. This is a really important community to us, and we really thank the community and the selection committee for this honor. Thank you very much.